Yeah, I would say that I definitely was like over the top with the perfectionism, and farming has really like helped calm that down a little bit. It can't be perfect sometimes. I used to hate the saying like good enough, but truly good enough. It's good enough.
Welcome to the 402nd installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, regenerative agriculture, community food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. Perfect is the enemy of good is a phrase often attributed to the French Enlightenment writer and historian Voltaire. His actual quote was, "The best is the enemy of the good," but you get the point. And before I go any further down the path of being an obnoxious name dropper, some full disclosure is in order here. I just Googled that stuff about Voltaire. Even though I'm very familiar with the quote in question, I wouldn't know a French Enlightenment writer from a dung beetle. Anyway, that phrase did come to mind recently when I was interviewing Jane Marinick, who has often struggled with how to jibe her own tendency toward perfectionism with the fact that she's chosen a career that's inherently adverse to having everything go as planned. Around a dozen years ago, while studying biology and sustainability at the University of Minnesota Duluth, Jane got interested in the role farming could play in not only providing healthy food, but supporting a resilient natural environment. She began working on the university's student-run farm, where she learned the basics of raising produce in the North Country, a region that has a short growing season and less than optimal soil conditions. Jane went on to get other farming experience, and today she manages the seasonal crew at Food Farm, a large organic vegetable operation just outside of Renshaw in northeastern Minnesota. Food Farm, which was launched by John and Jane Fisher Merritt in the early 70s, has a long tradition of utilizing innovative production and storage techniques to provide food to local CSA and wholesale customers. The operation, which today is owned and operated by the Fisher Merritt's son, Johneke, along with his wife, Annie Dugan, also has a reputation for launching other farming careers in the region. So, it's no surprise that Jane Marinick is using her experience on Food Farm to get her own farm dream established. Besides utilizing some of the larger operation's vegetable plots to grow her own product, Jane has started farming at her home within the city limits of Superior, Wisconsin, which is about a 20-minute drive northeast of Food Farm. She and her partner, Craig, have tilled up part of their yard, as well as a neighboring property they purchased. They even have a small greenhouse. Jane feels she's well on her way to having the agronomic skills needed to grow different kinds of foods, including her specialty, half a dozen varieties of edible beans. And it turns out there's a big demand for locally produced food in this part of the North Country. Besides selling through a farmer's market, a food co-op, and a few restaurants, Jane is also part of something called Twin Ports Rico, which uses Facebook as a platform through which eaters can order food from local farmers. Jane has been so happy with her agricultural progress that she and her family have begun looking for land in a rural area where they can set up shop permanently. But she realized a few years ago that before she jumped into farming as a full-fledged entrepreneur, she needed some background in business management. So, with the encouragement of Johneke, Jane and Craig took the Land Stewardship Project's Farm Beginning course during the winter of 2024 and 2025. Farm Beginnings is a training program that focuses on the goal setting, marketing, and financial skills needed to establish a successful farm business. Participants in Farm Beginnings start out the course going through an exercise identifying what values drive them, putting them in a better position to choose the type of farming career that allows them to live those values. Another major part of the course is holistic financial management, which focuses on big picture decision-making and goal-setting processes. In a holistic management system, a farmer's quality of life is put on the same level as the health of the soil or the operation's economic viability. Jane says the financial management training she got through Farm Beginnings was critical. She also benefited greatly from presentations given by established farmers who talked about the challenges as well as opportunities involved in picking this particular career path. But of particular benefit for Jane was the focus on holistic management and figuring out how to balance work with quality of life issues. She's in her mid-40s, so is mindful that, unlike a 20-something farmer, putting in endless hours of hard labor in vegetable plots, high tunnels, and greenhouses is not an option. Jane got a harsh reminder of that in 2025 when she had to undergo hip replacement surgery. So, managing a farm holistically has provided the beginning farmer with the ability to step back and take care of herself and leave room for things like attending her kids' cross-country meets. It's also helped her get over the drive to have everything go perfectly. If Voltaire was alive today in farming, he might rephrase his famous quote to say, "Perfect is the enemy of getting it done before the final frost." On a day when snow was melting fast in the March sun, I met Jane and Craig along with one of their teenage sons, Grady, at Food Farm. While sitting in an equipment shed, I talked to the Marinicks about the role Farm Beginnings has played in launching their own operation, which is called 4 Beans Farm. By the way, they raise more than 4 varieties of beans. The farm's name is derived from Jane and Craig's 4 children. After we checked out a greenhouse sprouting trays of onion seedlings, Jane sat down for a podcast interview to talk about how farming in 2 different areas, representing 2 different growing zones, can have its advantages, and how her hands-on experience with farming, as well as her Farm Beginnings experience, have helped her get over her pursuit of perfectionism. It turns out Jane, who was once an avid marathoner, sees a lot of overlap between farming and long-distance running. And it's not just because both endeavors involve a lot of sweating and achy joints. So, Jane, we had talked a little bit about your experience with Farm Beginnings here, and we're here out at Food Farm where you're working here and you also have you're growing some stuff out here. So it's kind of interesting because we're up here in the North Country, as they say, and you also are growing in Superior, Wisconsin, about 20 minutes from here. And one thing you mentioned was that you feel like there's some disadvantage to that, driving back and forth, that kind of thing, but there's some advantages to farming in 2 different places. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that some of the advantages that you see to kind of having these 2 different areas that you're growing in.
Well, there's a lot more to pay attention to and to learn. We have a different soil type. It's very much clay over there, and there's a nice silty loam over here. It's technically 2 different growing zones, 4A, 4B, so the climate's different. We often have frost a little later there than here. Yeah, so the lake almost creates this like microclimate kind of around it. If you look at like a growing zone map, there's a little sliver that kind of goes all around the South Shore that's would be 4B, and then stuff a little further away from it is back to 4A. But there's also, the weather, it could be 80 degrees here, and I will drive home, and it'll be 60 degrees sometimes in the summer. I think they say the lake keeps it warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. So it generally is colder out here in the wintertime than it is there.
And Superior is a city, even though Duluth would say no, it's not. It is a city. And it's, I guess one of the other advantages, which I think is an important advantage, is you say that you're near an elementary school and you're right in a neighborhood there, and people can see, oh my gosh, you can grow vegetables this far north. There is a way to be somewhat self-sufficient in growing our own food up in this area, that they realize that there is stuff being grown up here and that you can eat, that type of thing. I think that's a really important piece too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people maybe don't realize the seasonality of different types of crops. Like obviously I'm not going to put my tomatoes outside at the beginning of May, but there's plenty of things that can go in the ground then, and so I think people don't realize that, and it's nice to be able to show them. Although sometimes I think they think you don't know what you're doing. You're out there planting kale or something. We're like, well, it's going to freeze, or it's nice to have that so people can see it. And people like, when they stop and talk too, they often bring up stories about, when we used to go to my grandpa's farm and stuff like that. So people are connected to their food, going back a ways, but to then see it in front of them again often brings up memories and stories for people.
Yeah, that's one thing that I ran into several years ago when I came up here to interview some vegetable farmers in this area. Was there's actually quite a history of, back before transportation made it easy to transport stuff from California and Florida, this area had to be more self-sufficient and there was much more, there was like root cellars and ways of storing crops. So there is that history there. So it's interesting to see kind of, now that we have kind of modern conveniences like high tunnels, greenhouse technology is better, storage facilities are better, that kind of thing. It's kind of coming back a little bit, it seems like.
Yeah, I think a lot of people maybe look at this, the up north, up woods area and think that this isn't really farming country, but there's, especially like you said, with all those high tunnels and stuff, there's really a lot of opportunity up here to grow. I mean, not year round necessarily,
Right.
but there's a lot more, you can extend the season a lot longer than a lot of people think.
One of the things that you talked about when we were talking earlier was the other advantages to farming in two different areas where you're kind of farming very on a much smaller scale, kind of on your own, using your family labor, that type of thing. But then you're also seeing the other side of it. Food Farm is one of the bigger CSAs in the region here. I think it's like over 200 CSA shares, and then they also do wholesale markets, that kind of thing. They have a really nice setup here. They have some nice greenhouse setups. They have a lot of equipment. So you're kind of seeing two sides of that. And you've also are seeing it, because I know you manage crews here, so you're seeing that side of managing labor, that kind of thing. So you're seeing almost two extremes of the way you could do that, and kind of figuring out as you look to the future of your own farm, getting your own land, and kind of seeing maybe this is what I want to do, and well, maybe this is what I don't want to do a little bit when it comes to doing that on a more full-time basis. That you're able to see kind of two sides of the coin a little bit, two extremes of kind of how vegetable farming can be done, or specialty crop farming can be done in an area, and maybe trying to figure out, okay, this is the blend I would come to. Maybe this is kind of I don't want to always stay this small, but I also maybe don't want to get this big and manage a big crew, that kind of thing.
Right, it's good to see like just the different scales and tools available in the different ways of, having beds laid out and things versus, the size of your fields and all that. I think it's good to be able to kind of pick and choose between like, well, yeah, I don't mind hoeing this crop by hand, but I can certainly use a tractor when it makes it quicker, and just having all those seeing all the scales and having the different skills to kind of pick out what works best for you, I think is great.
Can you describe just what kind of enterprise you have going right now? Your beans is kind of your thing. It's called Four Beans Farm, but that's because you have 4 kids. But also, beans is a real focus of yours. Can you describe a little bit about what all you're growing and kind of what your markets are a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually just started with beans. I was just growing beans, and then have been adding, started to add like fall harvested vegetables, and now I'm doing, more throughout the season, tomatoes and other things with hoop house and whatever. So now I'm still doing the beans, and then a lot of fall harvested things, but adding a little bit more every year. I do sell a little bit of wholesale. I was certified last year, so I'm able to sell to the local co-ops, occasional restaurants, and we do a traditional farmers market, and then I'm part of a group called the Twin Ports Rico Group, and it's sort of like a Facebook-based farmers market, and people, different farmers will advertise what they have for the week, and people can go on and order from farmers individually, and then we all show up and meet in a furniture store parking lot in Duluth, and people drive by and pick up their veggies and other items from the farmers, and we're in and out in half an hour, 40 minutes, and it's great.
So you're 45? Is that right? 45. Yeah, you hesitated before when you said that. You weren't so sure. After a while, you don't want to remember what. Anyway, you're in your mid 40s. So you are kind of starting out seriously you've been kind of experimenting with farming and getting into farming fairly seriously for the last dozen years or so, but now you're really, you've taken the farm beginnings class and you're really starting to think about getting land, that kind of thing. So you're really getting deep into it at an age when maybe a lot of farmers have been doing it for several years, maybe are even at the point of, well, how much longer do I want to do this? So you're at a different point, but you feel like that maybe that gives you a little bit of a perspective in that you can look and say, okay, I know that my body, I don't have a 30-year-old body anymore. I really can start maybe figuring out a way to do things smarter rather than harder, that kind of thing. And it sounds like maybe even through Farm Beginnings, you kind of learned a little bit about how to kind of set some goals and look at how to, kind of strike a little bit of a balance rather than going into it when you're, say, 25, 30 and saying, well, I can do everything. I'll just work myself to the bone kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I got a titanium hip now, so I definitely am more aware of, how I use my body and the tools and stuff that I use. Yeah, I feel like I have perspective in like how to, like I don't even know how to say that, I already had kids and I went to school while I had kids, and so that was difficult, but I learned through that, like, you have to have a balance. And so going into this, I know that there needs to be a balance. Is it like that all the time? No, but there's going to be periods where it's busier and whatever, but to have those like non-negotiable, like I'm going to go to my kids' cross-country meet or whatever, that just is important to have that balance so you don't get burnt out, and just being aware of those things and taking care of your body the best you can and wear your protection, and if you can, have tools that work for your body, and
maybe not be hung up on perfectionism. It seems like that's something you've had to come to deal with a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that I definitely was like over the top with the perfectionism, and farming has really like helped calm that down a little bit, because I could prepare all I want. I can read all the things and know all the products to use and know all these different academic-y things, but it doesn't work, when the weather it doesn't cooperate, or the machinery doesn't cooperate, or whatever, you have a injury or something, it can't be perfect sometimes. I used to hate the saying like good enough, but truly good enough. It's good enough.
Sometimes nature calls the shots a little bit. That happens especially up in this area.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Speaking of your titanium hip and your hip replacement, not to get too much into your physical business, that kind of thing, but you had mentioned something that I thought was pretty funny, and I think is pretty fitting, is you had been a marathon runner, right? And you felt like that there was a crossover between being somebody who was into running, serious long distance running, and farming. Why is that?
Well, first of all, it is not easy to farm and run that much at the same time, but I think there's an overlap of like discipline, and going out and doing something when you don't want to do it, or the weather is crappy or whatever, and just knowing that you have this long-term goal, and you're not going to get there if you're not putting in the work. It's that way with running. If you don't, some people, nobody likes those people, can just go out and like run a marathon without training, but most people have to put some effort into it, and the same just teaches you how to be disciplined and work towards something. But again, like with running, you have to know, like, if you got something that doesn't feel great, you need to take care of it.
And you can't max out every day. You kind of do have to pace yourself. Pacing is, that's a big part of farming.
You can't start out sprinting, and you have to build those miles up slowly, and you have to build up your skills and farm goals slowly. If you do too much at once, you're gonna burn out.
I would also say that marathoners can be obsessive, and maybe farming can be attractive, obsessive people too. Can I say that?
You can say that. I know a few obsessive farmers, for sure.
I guess that goes back to the whole thing. Don't be stuck on perfectionism, and don't be so obsessive that you burn yourself out a little bit.
Right. Absolutely. I used to watch that little timer on my watch all the time, and now it's just more of going out there and getting it done.
Yeah, any advice to somebody who would, either something you learned through Farm Beginnings or whatever, any advice to somebody who's looking into something like this? Maybe especially if there's somebody who they're not young as you're still young, but are maybe getting into their middle age, that kind of thing, as you are.
I think the great thing about being maybe not as young is knowing that I have limits, and you should just try to understand yourself and know your limits, and know how you react to things when things don't go right, because things will not go right often. And if you're someone that, you might have to retrain yourself to just let things go a little bit, and good enough is good enough. That doesn't mean you can't have good goals and big ambitions. You just gotta, sometimes tempering that is gonna get you where you want to be quicker. You're making more thoughtful choices about what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're kind of at the point where you've been looking for land, and you're kind of, if the right situation come up, you'd kind of be ready to go a little bit, and you're really getting pretty serious about it now.
Yeah, I mean, finding land is hard, and I think I am getting a little bit impatient. I do want to, move on and do my own thing. It's time.
For more information on the Farm Beginnings course and 4Beans Farm, see the podcast page for Ear to the Ground episode 402 at landstewardshipproject.org. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-816-9342. We'd like to note that this episode, just like all Ear to the Ground podcasts, is the product of work done by real humans. Generative artificial intelligence, also known as generative AI, plays no part in the recording or editing of these shows. By the way, it helps us greatly if you can give Ear to the Ground a rating on whatever podcast platform you utilize. And word of mouth is the best way to spread the news about our podcast. If you like what you hear, tell at least one person about LSP's Ear to the Ground. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.